It's interesting, when I was contemplating and praying about my outline for this talk, this was my very first point that I wrote down. And yet it was the very last one for me to write out. I kept avoiding it. Honestly, I really didn't want to talk about it. In fact, how many of you that have experienced deep pain, whether it's your own making or otherwise, can relate to my thought of, I don't want to listen to my pain. It's already declaring itself loudly in my life. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to feel it. It's already yelling, and it's deafening at times. The other awareness for me was that I honestly didn't know if I could speak on this, or even if it was appropriate for me to do so, because this is a very real and raw season for me in my life. I would use the word palpable, and very present, and very painful. In fact, who knew? Pain is painful, right? Rather profound. But here I go. Many of you know my story, but for those who don't, my husband Paul is battling neurological Lyme disease. 4 years ago, his body imploded, and it's been a brutal daily battle ever since. I won't go into all the details, but it's a complex, debilitating disease that has ravaged his brain, his body, and his soul. In fact, I would say that Lyme is fighting for Paul to relinquish on all fronts. It is exhausting, it's disheartening, and it's beyond overwhelming at times. And I'd be lying to you if I didn't say to you in all honesty that there have been times when I am holding his head in my hands as seizure after seizure after seizure after wave of seizure consumes him. And I cry out to Jesus and I say, please, Jesus, just heal him. Or if not, just let him come home. Because this is not living. And so you can see why I wrestled with God when I felt I was to talk on this. And here is what he whispered to me. He said, Amy, this isn't about you. This is about me. So tell them about me in your pain. Psalms 56, 3 and 4, when I am afraid, I will trust in you. In God, whose word I praise. In God, I will trust. I will not be afraid. 2 Corinthians 4, 16 through 18, therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we're being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And then lastly, Exodus 14:14, the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Recently, I was sitting in a hospital waiting room in the wee hours of the morning, unfortunately a regular hangout spot for me. And so I decided to pick up an inspirational magazine for solace, People magazine, of course. When I came across a quote from a young actress who said that when she is in her toughest moments in life, she tries to remember that's when she does her best work. And I just felt like God right in that moment kind of whispered to me and said, Amy, just watch and wait, because when you are in your toughest moments, that's when I will do my best work. I believe pain, if we embrace it, postures us for a deeper ability to listen to God. When we are desperate, we sit in his presence with a completely different attentiveness. It's human instinct, right? To want to run from our pain, to bury it, to medicate it, to distract ourselves from having to face it. But I contend, as does your soul, embrace it. Lean into it, not away from it. And besides, have you figured out yet that you can't ignore it? Anyways, if you try, it always resurfaces. So take it to Jesus full on, because he can handle it far better than you. As I said, we've kind of figured out yet that we don't really control much of anything, right? And just recently, I was wrestling with an equally but different, painful vantage point in my life. My 25-year-old son's years of battling addiction. And I have to be honest with you, I was angry. In fact, let's just say I was pissed off. Can I say that in church? You know that God can handle the full weight of us, right? He can. And I was pissed off because I felt like I was ringside and I was watching the enemy take another round. And he was gloating. And I was letting God have it. It was all internal. Most people had no idea it was going on all day long, but I was just wrestling loudly, internally. I was just silently raging. I was demanding God for answer. Where were you? Where are you? After all these years of praying and battling and contending, when is that point where you come in and you swoop in and you save the day? Because I've seen you do it. I know you can. I believe it. Where are you, God? And gratefully, although God still felt silent, there began a quiet release in my soul, almost like air deflating. And as I prayed, I realized as I asked God to speak, maybe he was. A marvelous stirring began. And I love that about the Holy Spirit, don't you? I think he just waits sometimes for just our exhausted surrender, right? And then there was just this faint murmur of a tune, a childhood remembrance of a song. My God is so big, so strong and so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do. My God is so big, so strong and so mighty. And as I drove down the road, I was just ignoring anybody else that was watching me. I was crying and I was singing at the top of my lungs, almost to the enemy as a declaration saying, okay, you may have won that round, but not the final one, because I know that one's already determined. And so I'm going to choose to fight another day. I'm going to contend. I'm going to intercede. I'm going to believe for my son when he can't see it yet, that you, God, are at work. Always. A friend sent this to me via email a few weeks back. I don't know who it was, but it was a keynote speaker at a conference, and she shares her story on pain. I loved it. She says, he approached at the close of the conference after the crowds had dispersed and headed home. Moments before, he'd heard me share a sliver of my story, my complicated story. Cancer, 3 times over. An inability to eat and speak normally, the months of treatment that took me to the brink of death, the years of physical trauma that assaulted body and mind with suffering that I didn't know any human could endure. I know you don't really know me, but he seemed both unsure and determined. Do you mind if I pray for you? It wasn't a hollow offering, not a passing, I'll pray for you, muttered in the awkwardness of not knowing what to say. His question, his offer was sincere. He wanted to pray for me. In fact, he needed to. And so I smiled and I received the gift. But as he poured out his heart, as he pleaded with God to bring complete healing to my frail and broken body, as he begged the Almighty to restore the months and the years I'd lost, I felt the tiniest stirring of rebellion deep within. But what if healing isn't the greater gift? What if the losses have delivered an acute awareness of God? What if the suffering is forcing a grip tight on Jesus? What if the daily physical struggle is finally subduing the internal one, the pride and the insecurity that I've long fought? If so, is a prayer for healing what I need after all? She goes on to say that she didn't expect these questions to bubble to the surface while a kind stranger prayed this beautiful prayer. More often than not, I fight against my new reality. I mourn what I've lost. There is no part of me that relishes the pain or cares to revisit it, and yet, as this man prayed, a Holy Spirit revelation pushed up against those healing prayers that I'm so often desperate for. What if relief from the struggle isn't the gift that we think it is? Instead, what if the sweeter mercy is found in the presence of it? Isaiah 45:3. I will give you the treasure of darkness and the hoards in secret places, that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who calls you by your name, so that you may know it is I. The question of the place and purpose of struggle and suffering is not an easy one. It brings into the question the motives, and the love of God. And yet the speaker goes on to say, after years of more pain than I ever imagined I'd endure, I can tell you that I'm starting to see suffering as a gift, delivered in cover of darkness. Suffering and pain softens my tendency towards self-sufficiency. Suffering bends my knees to a place of humility. Suffering opens me to a deeper compassion. Suffering ignites an inexplicable craving for God's glory. And suffering stirs a greater longing for eternity. There's something holy about God's presence and purpose in our pain. I can't ignore the work that God has wrought through my suffering. It's an unexpected mercy, an uncommon gift. An uncommon gift. Jesus has used the pain in my life to draw me to him. And you know what I found there? I found that the deep awareness of Jesus, he understands. He understands in a way that I can't imagine because he endured pain on levels in ways that I can't imagine for me to be restored to him. Hebrews 12:2, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of God. This is a God who deeply understands the pain that I feel, the pain that you feel. And I believe he'll use it if we let him. There's a great C.S. Lewis quote, God whispers to us in our pleasure, but he shouts to us in our pain. Give yourself permission to let your pain yell loudly. And when we don't know where to look for joy, look to Jesus. Listen to your pain.